Welcome back. Glad to see you again. Over the past few weeks, this channel has seen a real increase in views, upvotes, and comments. I'm really happy to see this. Thank you. It's gratifying to know that this information is getting out and people seem to be interested in what has been discovered. Please keep sharing if this information seems credible to you. This video will again present new and original research. However, I've been sitting on this for the past 15 years. I haven't even written about this in my book. I've not shared it with anyone until now. Why, you ask? As I'll get into, it's a possible hint as to the timing of an important event. That is something that can often be misinterpreted and misused. I have no desire to open myself up to that kind of thing. But time keeps moving forward, and we are now reaching the point where this information either shows itself to be valid or it doesn't. At this point, I'd like to share it with a wider audience. This amazing discovery came about by constructing a timeline of historical dates based on those recorded in the Bible and a proper understanding of certain anchor points. One of the most important is the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel. I'll get into that as we continue. Many people throughout the centuries have made an attempt at a timeline. One of the most well-known is that done by Bishop Ussher. But there are others written by people such as Isaac Newton and even Magellan. The Bible gives many dates and cues about timing, and one can use these to link time from creation down through the history of Israel to the time of Jesus Christ and then forward until the millennial kingdom. Here is the timeline that I have put together. You can see there are several columns with different dating systems. The first column is the overall year count since creation. I'll get into how that was determined shortly. The next column contains the year in BC or AD that we are very familiar with. And here the next column has either an A or a B. This corresponds to the first half of the year and the last half of the year. This becomes important, especially when working through the reigns of the divided kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Then there are the columns for biblical references and detailed notes. And next there is a column with the ongoing 7-year sabbatical cycle. Again, I'll describe how this has been determined as we continue. Hopefully that gives you a sense how this timeline has been organized. So let's talk about how this was done. First, the Bible does not state exact years according to any specific method of dates. That is, there is no mention of BC or AD. Dates are usually in relation to some other important anchor event. So blocks of related dates, which are consistent relative to each other, need to be anchored to a single important event which locks them into place in history. This is exactly how the genealogy in Genesis works. Most people are very familiar with the list of names and begats from Adam to Noah. It's a very simple thing to use the various dates listed there to come up with a timeline which spans over 1,000 years. You just don't know in which year to anchor the beginning of the life of Adam to. And here I'll insert my working hypothesis. In my 2-part series of the date hidden from history, I give many evidences that the most important date in history, that of the death and resurrection of Jesus the Messiah, occurred in 31 AD. Please watch those videos for how this was determined. Add that to the hypothesis that human history is made up of 7 1,000-year periods, that is days, with 31 AD as the very last year of the middle of the week, that is day 4, that means that the year was the 4,000th year of human history. Therefore, the first year of history was in 3970 BC. 3970 BC. So, if I lock the timeline beginning with Adam to that year, is this correct? If it is, the rest of the timeline would have to be consistent, and the various patterns will have to make sense. We'll start seeing confirmation of this as we continue. So let's head down to the time of Abraham. The genealogies continue after the flood. It is easy to go all the way down to Terah, Abraham's father. However, the exact year of Abraham's birth is not given. Genesis 12:4 states that he was 75 when he left Haran. With the information in Genesis 11:32, where it says that Terah dies in Haran, most assume that Abraham left in the year his father died. This provides for an anchor to determine the year Abraham was born. The information given in the biblical text isn't always very clear. Sometimes you need to understand the overall context. The next period of time falls into this category. Exodus 12:41 states that the children of Israel lived in Egypt for 430 years, to the very day. People assume that the period of Egyptian slavery was that long. But the question is, who do you start with? Do you start with Jacob and his family entourage when they came to Egypt? Or do you start with Joseph, who came to Egypt many years before that? This is very important to get correct because it affects the assumed year of the Exodus. What one discovers is that the period of 430 years is meant to be from the time between when Abraham leaves Haran and the exodus of Israel from Egypt. So how does that work? Abraham is the father of the nation of Israel. Therefore, where he went, symbolically, all of Israel went as well. There was a famine in the land of Canaan immediately after Abraham arrived. This forced Abraham to seek food in Egypt. So the 430 years starts from the time Abraham spent time in Egypt until the time that the nation of Israel left during the Exodus. From 1887 BC through to 1457 BC, this is the year of the Exodus. So let's quickly scroll through and give you a sense of that time period. The next period is from the Exodus through to the time of King Solomon. 1 Kings 6 verse 1 states that it was 480 years from the Exodus until the 4th year of Solomon's reign and the year the temple began to be built. So let's head down to there. It was finished 7 years later. Notice, this just happens to be in the 3000th year of human history. After the death of King Solomon, the country splits after a civil war. It is notoriously tricky to work through the length of reigns for the various kings, but there does seem to be an overall time period given, with the prophet Ezekiel. His object lesson of the 430 days is specifically stated to be the punishment of the nation where 1 day is equal to 1 year. The entire time period predicts the rest of the judgment of Israel until the start of the millennial kingdom. However, there seems to be a secondary understanding for this time period as well. The 430 days is made up of a period of 390 days for the kingdom of Israel and a period of 40 days for the kingdom of Judah. This has been a mystery, and most people do not know what to make of it. I, too, did not know how to reconcile the two time periods within the overall 430 days. All I knew is that the entire period of 430 was for the entire nation looking forward through time. But then I considered it backwards through time. Ezekiel's object lesson took place right before God departed from the temple permanently. This extremely significant event took place in 591 BC. If one moves back from that point for 390 years, one arrives at the end of King David's reign. So let's scroll back through time here. So at this point, moving back another 40 years, one arrives at the beginning of King David's reign. This was in the year 1021 BC, where David becomes king, first over Judah, and then 7 years later, he is made king over the entire nation. So it is 430 years from when the beloved King David starts his kingship until when God departs from his habitation in the temple. And from there, it is only 5 years until the complete destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by King Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. Then the prophecy of the 70 weeks lays out the timeline for Israel from the destruction of Jerusalem until Jesus the Messiah is made king over Israel. Obviously, that latter event has not happened yet. So yes, the timeline is yet future to us. What is yet future includes the final 1,000 years of the millennial kingdom of Jesus. In my 7-part series on the 70 weeks, I show how the 70 weeks begins when God himself starts the countdown of the first 7 weeks. In 587, this year here, God promises that the Jewish people will again return to and rebuild Jerusalem, just as the prophecy outlines. 49 years later, the Anointed One Cyrus issues a decree allowing this very thing to happen. Then there is the first gap, 14 weeks of years, or 96 years. Then the next 62 weeks of years start. Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem and rebuilds the city and the walls. The entire period of 62 weeks of years sees multiple times when the walls of Jerusalem are torn down and rebuilt. The temple is constructed, partially destroyed, and then rebuilt. This continues all the way until 6 BC, when the Messiah arrives and is born in Bethlehem. It's very interesting to notice that the angel Gabriel is the one who spoke the 70 weeks of prophecy and is also the one who predicts the arrival of the Messiah at the end of the 62 weeks. Jesus is cut off in 31 AD and the new covenant is rejected by Israel as a whole. The Messiah has no covenant with Israel. The second gap starts from this point. It is another period of weeks of years, very likely 290 weeks. Also notice that 31 AD is the 4,000th year of human history and the last year of that fourth day. This period is expected to end in 2025 AD, and the final 1 week would start. 7 years later, and 2032 could very well see the end of the tribulation period, the wrath of God poured out on the unbelieving population, the victory of the Messiah over Satan and his evil forces, and the establishment of the millennial kingdom takes place, heralding the arrival of the day of the Lord. There are many other references to dates that flesh out further details in the timeline of history, but with those overall anchor points, the entire period of human history can be worked out just with the information given in the Bible. The information is there, but it sure takes a lot of effort, and things are not at all easy to connect. However, there is a further layer that can be added: the sabbatical year cycle. During the Exodus from Egypt, God instructed the people of Israel to institute a cycle of 6 years, with the 7th year a sabbatical year of rest. Then after 7 such cycles, during the second half of the final 7th year, the year of Jubilee begins. The people of Israel did not keep these sabbatical years or Jubilee years for much of their history. However, it is something that God has instituted as an ongoing cycle. There is no information if the cycle was in operation before the Exodus, but the assumption can be made that it can be layered onto human history before the Exodus as well. If it is accurate that the Exodus can be anchored to 1457 BC, and that is the first year of the 7-year cycle, then the cycle can be run backwards all the way to the year of creation. And it just so happens that the year of creation is the first year of the sabbatical cycle. And the first year of the Jubilee, the first Jubilee cycle happened 7 years after the creation. There is no manipulation happening here. The years and the cycles just have this relationship. This blew my mind when I first saw it in this spreadsheet. And now here's where Enoch enters the picture. Enoch was born in 3348 BC, and he lives 365 years. In that year, Enoch is taken from the earth. He does not die. He is raptured away. Notice this occurs at the end of the first 1,000-year day of history. What is extremely interesting is that 2984, the year of the rapture, would have also been a year of Jubilee. Now, there is no biblical evidence that the year of Jubilee was celebrated before the Exodus, but we have very little information about how God related with his followers during this time of history. It very well could have been. So taking this realization from the timeline, let's move forward to our present year. So here we are in 2022. Notice that according to the sabbatical year cycle, this year is year 7. And remember, this cycle runs all the way back to the year of creation and is anchored there. Notice also that the second half of this year will mark the next year of Jubilee during the autumn period. Now, if it is accurate that the final 70th week begins in 2025, and if it is true that the church will be raptured from the earth before that period begins in order for God to again concentrate on his chosen nation of Israel, then the rapture must take place very shortly. If we can look to Enoch as a type, as the very first person who was raptured, then the timing of his rapture is very significant. If he was raptured during a year of Jubilee, then might it just be possible that this upcoming year of Jubilee could see the ultimate fulfillment of this type and mark the year that the church is raptured away? Now, to be clear, I am not predicting this will happen. I am pointing out a significant similarity that becomes evident when observing the timeline and cycles through history. It is just something to consider. I first noticed this relationship in the chart 15 years ago. I made the specific decision not to share this with anyone, as I did not want people to misuse this information. But now, here is 2022, and this possibility still exists. So I'm sharing this information now. Again, do not misunderstand. I'm not making a prediction. However, if this year of Jubilee relationship is accurate, then a very significant event could occur sometime between autumn of this year and next. Please carefully consider this information. Always be ready and know that the time is short.